Disclaimer, this is not a real mod, it is not being made. Stop asking me for the link to the mod, it does not exist. You know what time it is, gamers. After quite a bit, because reasons, we are finally back with another region concept. If you don't know what these are, Region Concepts is the name I gave to a series of community art projects held within my Discord. The goal of the project is to create a full concept for a Rain World region, including new fauna, flora, and sights to behold. As always, this wouldn't be possible without all the incredibly talented artists in my Discord server who pumped out all this wonderful content for me to get ad revenue from. So, without further ado, let's get started with the prompt. The Deadlands. Seemingly endless dusty wastes that form an ever-growing scar on the continent. This desert is a recent phenomenon. You can still see the wreckage of the desert swallowed and burned to dusty ruin. Something happened here to cause this, but you don't know what. Despite the danger posed by the Deadlands, many intelligent creatures ventured into it seeking either riches or safety from predators. All many found was a slow death face down in the hot sand. A chosen few left with more than they entered with, or decided not to leave at all. You take on the role of the Nomad, one of a slugcat species adapted to more arid regions that finds itself alone, or perhaps banished, and lost among the Deadlands. In order to escape, you must get past the largest scavenger toll on the continent, located within the Western Mountain Pass, the only escape from the endless desert. The toll is run by the Desert Scavengers, the most powerful tribe on the continent, who used the riches the desert gave to grow their trading power significantly. This has led to quite the drought of pearls in their territory, however, so the Nomad will have to venture deep into the heart of the Deadlands to find its ticket out, and perhaps find something else of value on its way through. This was the prompt I gave at the start of my concept. The Deadlands is a great desert that spreads like a pox across the lands, burning away forests and evaporating lakes. The cause is unknown, but it could have something to do with the sunburnt remains of a collapsed iterator can located at the center of the region. The biome is not governed by rain, but rather by the sun. As the cycle continues, the sun will beat down harder and harder as it gets closer to midday, eventually becoming fatal to most unadapted creatures. Though the heat is not always the problem, as the opposite can also be true. At night, the desert cools down greatly, and creatures become much rarer as most fauna is resting during the cold nights. But few creatures adapted to this are out and about during the night. The Nomad can rarely wake in the night and be forced to contend with those that did the same, though the Nomad only ever wakes up in the early morning, and can watch the sunrise with some extra time added to their cycle. The Nomad starts at the edge of the region, having just been barred from passage through the Great Scavenger City. But before we get started with the Nomad's journey, we should discuss its abilities. The Nomad's kind adapted well to arid heat, but it was far from designed for a true desert. It retains water better than most slugcats, whose slimy skin would dry them up in a matter of minutes, though the Nomad still must watch its water supply alongside its food to ensure that it doesn't suffer that fate. The Nomad must consume water with its specialized tongue, and is primarily insectivorous. Not that this is really a problem in the Deadlands, given the abundance of insects. Though let's not beat around the bush here. The main talent the Nomad has are those flaps. If the Nomad catches a draft or jumps from a high place, it can use the rising air of the desert to catch itself, gliding at double the walking speed, allowing it to clear hazards such as scorching terrain or deadly, stationary predators. The fur on the Nomad's body also allows it to be the softest of all the slugcats, except maybe Saint. Now that our protagonist is all lined out, let's talk about the regions of the Deadlands. Once the Nomad leaves the limits of the Scavenger City, it stumbles into the Dust Bowl. As the Deadlands expanded, many landscapes were consumed. The Dust Bowl was once a forest, quite similar to many others around iterator structures, thriving in the heavy rain. But as that rain stopped and the sun encroached, the leaves dried and disintegrated, and the tree trunks were burnt into hollow husks that dot the landscape. The remains of foliage now lies as a thick layer of dust, so deep you could swim in it at certain spots. The trees in this area serve as a great spot for the Nomad to glide off of, as the dust is oftentimes quite dangerous, as more often than not, predators are more used to it than you are. Speaking of creatures, the first of which you will find in this area is the iguana. The first creature many spot in the Deadlands is the sluggish iguana. While adapted to climate such as this, it is far too slow and lazy to live anywhere deeper in the Deadlands. Here, however, is quite perfect for it. Dust piles act as solid enough camouflage, and it uses its claws to climb up to ideal sunbathing spots, though the iguana holds a potentially deadly secret. If snuck up on and speared while unaware, the iguana's tail will immediately separate from its body and begin to writhe around. This odd tactic is primarily an adaptation to deal with its natural predators, such as vultures and scavenger hunting parties, though the latter have more or less learned the tricks. This tail is still quite dangerous, and will chase down and attempt to tackle the assailant as the main body makes a break for it. This tail is mostly muscle, and covered in hard and sometimes sharp scales, so it is anything but harmless, though it is clumsy and much slower than you, so you can usually outrun it, as the muscles stop spasming after 10 or so seconds, and the tail falls limp. More often than not, the iguana itself is not a threat, though they do possess quite the bite, so stay wary and don't walk into it. Next up, the desert opal. As one gets deeper into the Deadlands, flora becomes less and less common, but in the Dust Bowl you're still able to find rare species such as this. The desert opal is a succulent plant that retains water quite well, serving as both a food and water source. It is full of nutrients due to its long-reaching roots, which dig deep into the dry soil or the sides of burnt trees. The lifespan of a full plant is quite short though. As the cycle progresses and the heat intensifies, the opal shrivels up and loses most of its water content. It loses almost all of its water content and most of its nutrient content, and it becomes a hard nugget of inedible plant matter near the cycle's end. Next up, the cactus bomb. Serving as both food and weapon, the cactus bombs are found throughout all biomes of the Deadlands. In their basic state, they are a simple, rounded cactus, but can be picked up by a crouching nomad and used as a weapon. Upon throwing a fully grown cactus bomb, the limbs will burst off of it, impaling any creature with a shotgun burst of spines. Another plus to this dangerous piece of flora is that upon exploding, a nomad can eat each piece of the cactus bomb. A large enough bomb will often spawn 2 to 4 pieces, each giving half a food pip and 1 water pip upon eating. Larger creatures will be able to withstand the cactus bomb, though the pain is immense and will oftentimes stun for quite a bit, allowing for escape or, optionally, further violence. Next up, the brown lizard. A frightening foe lurks among the dust. The brown lizard is a surprisingly fast, opportunistic predator whose primary food source are the small centipedes that lurk under the dust. But of course, come too close and you'll be on the menu too. The brown lizard is quite fast on land, but cannot scale poles or walls. You may have noticed that the brown lizard's back is covered in long, dangerous-looking spines. These spines primarily act as a deterrent for predators that would attack it from above, such as the aforementioned vultures, and the lizard will make them useful if it feels threatened, extending its spines and hissing loudly upon seeing a predator to let them know not to come any closer. It also uses the spines in battles with other males for a mate. Another bonus to the spines is that, upon the lizard's death, the nomad can use them as spears for its own good. Yippee! As the nomad leaves the Dust Bowl and scales down a long metal structure, it finds itself face to face with the biggest obstacle facing many would-be explorers of this part of the Deadlands: the Salt Flats. The Salt Flats are a massive dried lake bed that spans a large portion of the Deadlands. A great expanse of almost completely flat desert with little no refuge from the sweltering sun, and an area so open that any predator could spot you from quite the ways away. The Salt Flats is primarily a long stretch of flat, salty plains that stretch outwards, dotted by the wreckage of machinery and sunken boats designed to intake water for the iterator at the center of the Deadlands. The Nomad had best make their journey through the Salt Flats quick, or those that it meets will make it quicker. First off being the rain moose. Relatives of the reindeer, the rain moose are a much more efficient species developed for survival on the sweltering desert. Their legs are long and thin, and their skin is thick and tough, but designed to absorb as little heat as possible from the sun. Additionally, they are designed to gain and retain water as best as possible. With a long tongue to find it where it may be, they hunt the salt flats for foliage in small crevices, racing across the sands and taking refuge in the shade of the larger buildings. They have no predators that are smaller than them, even in the wastes, so they don't seem to mind the Nomad if it walks up to them, and might even allow them along for a ride for a short distance. This should make the Nomad's journey across the salt flats much easier, but anger them and they might stun you and make you easy pickings for another, bigger animal. Next up, the Tumbling Spiders. A frightening ambush, the Tumbling Spider assaults any that it runs across. Finding a roaming tumbleweed can be a very big opportunity for scavengers and slugcats alike. They can be caught and pilfered for whatever goods they've collected, such as rocks or spears as they drag through the long desert. But some have noticed this fact and now use it to their advantage. The tumbling spider disguises itself as a tumbleweed, using the desert winds to travel far distances with minimal energy investment. The larger tumbling spider hunts in a very similar way to wolf spiders once disturbed, but one might find them more difficult to evade, with so few structures to evade their jaws around. When tumbling spiders are young, though, they will take to banding together into one large ball of spiders, which tumbles all the same, meaning you could get a faceful of small spiders, or one very large pissed off arachnid. Either way, not a fun time. Next up, the Salt Worm. The Salt Worm is a large centipede variant that hides beneath piles of hardened salt. To escape the blistering heat, saltworms seal themselves flat against the ground, insulating their vulnerable underbelly and protecting them from the heat. When touched, they will spring forth in a burst of salt and attempt to grab their prey, oftentimes dragging them deep into a salt pile or burrow upon a successful kill. Despite their size, their armor is quite thin, as it is only comprised of hardened salt crystals stuck to their exoskeleton, so enough spears can kill one, allowing the Nomad to score a meal from its body. Don't think for a second that this will be easy though, as a disturbed saltworm has been storing its energy for a long time, and is notably faster and more desperate than even a red centipede. Mixed with their size, it can make them quite the formidable opponent. Once a saltworm has been disturbed and dispatched after that, you may sometimes be lucky enough to find a clutch of eggs in its den, which contain a bit of moisture alongside the nutrients. Next up, the Sand Striders. Seen far in the distance roaming, the towering Sand Striders are the main fixture of the salt flats. Sand Striders are purposed organisms descended from reindeer, designed to make the pilgrimage from more temperate areas to the Deadlands. But when their purpose was exhausted, many found themselves simply wandering. Each strider has minor differences on their payload, denoting the iterator that made them. From their sides, nutrient-rich slurries and canisters of pure water are fed directly into the strider's blood by pipes, as their mouths are sealed by a harness that both keeps their burden on and prevents them from inhaling sand. Within the great containers on their backs are shipments of slag keys, neurons, water, and any and all apparatuses that can be used to even slightly help a dying iterator. All seemingly too little too late. The Sand Striders are a deeply enriching boost to the starved desert ecosystem. Flocks of animals may find solace in their shadows, traveling alongside the Striders to safer areas, and though their calloused hides deflect spears, bombs and some of the larger predators can burst their tough skin and break their fortified payloads, collapsing the body and providing enough water and food to last several cycles. Though, if you wish to cash in on some of this food, you'll find it a bit difficult, as Sand Strider carcasses are competitive arenas for food and water among the big and the small. The final creature of the Salt Flats is the Bone Angel. In the silence of the night, a deep ringing can sometimes be heard, coming from some of the more remote areas of the flats. If you follow it before day comes, you might meet a Bone Angel. In the cold midnight of the desert winds, a towering figure hovers in place. A giant pale creature judges the Nomad's soul, with nothing but an emotionless gaping hole from which it lets out its signature ringing sound. If the Nomad has high karma when meeting the Bone Angel, it will give them a buff ranging in strength from increasing their food or water meter by 50% to increasing their movement and or flight speed, or just more spear damage. The Bone Angels vanish by the sunrise and appear to be revered by the scavengers, as art of them can be found throughout their structures. It is unknown where they came from, and they don't seem too intent on telling you. When the Nomad reaches the end of the flats, it finds itself with two options: continue onwards horizontally, or seek another way through near the bottom of the Conduit, the entrance to an intake system that could lead right into the center of the Deadlands. That intake system is now known as the Arid Tunnels. The city's sewer systems were repurposed when the Iterator was created, and they were flooded with water so an intake system could be mostly ignored. The connection to the large lake allowed it to pump as much water as the Iterator could ever need, but when the water left, the tunnels that were once flooded and filled with aquatic life are now filled with creatures ready to scavenge off their remains. Thus, the Arid Tunnels were created, a wide network of sewer tunnels going deep into the heart of the city. Shelter from the sun, yes, but be wary, for other creatures think of them the same way. First of those creatures being the bombardier bugs. Distant relatives of the egg bugs, the bombardier bugs are much deadlier variants. They travel in small packs of 2 to 4. Among these packs there are two distinct variations: brood carriers and guards. The guards are more plentiful, with there usually being only one brood carrier in a pack. The guards are also what give the bombardier bugs their name, as their back contains a highly volatile explosive sac that they can rupture on demand. Of course, they usually don't want to do this, as it is fatal to them as well, so they usually make a display of just how scary and dangerous their explosives are before they have to resort to detonating themselves. They do this to protect the brood carriers, which hold the traditional egg bug loot, being eggs. If a guard is killed while their explosive sac is inflated, it will obviously explode, but if killed when not exploded, such as from an ambush, you can actually pick up this explosive sac, which acts as a much heavier and much more powerful grenade, which can be detonated from any distance with a rock or a spear. Nature really has created C4. Next up, the orange hook fruit. Hanging from the ceilings of the larger rooms of the Arid Tunnels are the orange hook fruit, a hanging plant that feeds off the leftover grime coating the walls. The plant grows into a hook-like shape, covered in small scrumptious fruits that, when eaten in totality, give 2 food pips. These fruits often grow in hard-to-reach places, but a good spear can often cause individual edible bits to fall off all at once, allowing a crafty slugcat to get an otherwise unachievable meal. With roots strong enough to burrow through stone and even some metals, this plant has quite a hold on its location and cannot be dislodged even by an explosive. This hardiness is a boon for the Nomad, as it can actually grab onto the hook fruit due to its hook-like shape, and use it for parkour, holding on to escape grounded predators or hopping from hook to pass a large chasm. This fruit could save your life in more ways than one, and is quite the unexpected gift in such an environment. Finally, in the Arid Tunnels are the vampites. Taking the form of bat-like flying predators, the vampites are quite the dangerous creature to run into while stuck in the dark. While also found out and about traversing the Deadlands during the early morning or late night, they rest during the day in the Arid Tunnels. Vampite packs are oftentimes found hanging from the ceiling in numbers of 3 to 5, and when disturbed will not hesitate to take the free meal that just stumbled into their den. When prey is spotted, a vampite will flutter in the air around them for a second, looking for a good place to latch on, before dive-bombing down onto them and fulfilling that promise. If one latches onto a slugcat, it will begin to slowly drain their food and hydration until nothing is left, with a rate that increases exponentially the more that are latched on. Once there's nothing left to drain, the slugcat will slowly begin to slow down, as if starving, before passing out and dying. Vampites can be shaken off with enough persistence, and a hard landing from a tall height will instantly knock them off. The pests are weak, only needing a single spear to be dispatched even from the relatively weak arms of the Nomad, but their tendency to linger in the air and pack nature makes it difficult to kill them all easily unless you have an explosive and a very explosive-resistant face. Quite the threat, as the deeper down you go, the more you will find nesting near the ceiling. Stay low and be wary not to wake them. If the Nomad travels to the bottom left of the Arid Tunnels, they will also be met with something that they haven't yet seen, one which has lingered here longer than even the Bone Angels. An echo. Its name is Dying Leaves on Cold Mountains, and it speaks to the Nomad before granting it the bonus karma it may need to reach the end of its journey and return safely.
This was always a dark and lonely place. I knew these tunnels better than any. It was my job to maintain them. I never liked it, and nobody thanked me for it. So one cycle, I had enough of these slimy steel walls, and left them behind. I never thought I would end up one of those who stayed. I could have sworn I wanted this least of any. And back in this spot too. What horrible irony.
As the cycle is reset, the Nomad is left wondering just what it was that it saw. If the Nomad were to, instead of going down into Arid Tunnels, travel to the right towards the retaining wall of this particular facility, they would instead find themselves entering the Sun-baked Citadel, close to the final leg of their journey, to find their ticket out of this hellish desert. The Sun-baked Citadel encompasses the remains of the city that hasn't been crushed underneath the weight of the iterators can. The metallic floors here act as a conduit for the sunlight, heating them up to such temperatures that they can cook the Nomad if it wanders on them for too long. These sections of superheated floor constitute the main threat in the Sun-baked Citadel, but the creatures here are still nothing to scoff at, and can end you rather quickly. The first off, not following that trend, is the Candle Mouse. The candle mice can be found scurrying through the darkness, the primary prey animal in the Deadlands. Their speed is everything to them, and they will run from everything. Unsurprisingly, they are distant cousins of the lantern mouse, but have traded their bioluminescence and ability to climb poles for long legs built for speed, jumping, and outmaneuvering predators. But the bulb on their tail still holds the lantern mice's iconic glow, if not with a fiercer luminosity. When harmed in almost any way, the candle mouse will pop this bulb willingly, creating an effect identical to a flashbang, stunning most creatures, especially at night. The Nomad can also grab the lantern mouse and squeeze it by holding the grab button to make use of this flashbang for themselves. A fruit placed on the ground or held by a still slugcat will lure the candle mouse and can be used as a trap to grab them. This flashbang will be quite useful at ceasing the onslaught of a deadly predator, though you could always just leave the candle mouse alone as well. Next up, the Pain Poppies. Found amidst most dark crevices in the Deadlands, the Pain Poppies are found in surplus within the Sun-baked Citadel. The darkened building interiors grant them a perfect environment to hunt their main prey, foolish small creatures like you seeking to escape the scorching sun. Pain poppies functionally could be described as an unholy amalgamation between pain cones and wormgrass. They grow in clusters of between 3 to 15 flowers on a single plant. When a creature draws close to a pain poppy, the flowers will quickly spring open, emitting a popping sound as they do so, and will shoot out 3 tendrils each towards their target. By the time the tendrils drag you all the way in, you're almost entirely done for. The easiest way to avoid a cluster of pain poppies is to simply not go near them, but if you must to get past them, you can bait each flower to open a few at a time, as when only a few flowers open up, you're pretty easily able to get them off, as they're even weaker than wormgrass. It's when almost all of them spring open that you're in real trouble. Additionally, a single patch will only ever focus on attacking one creature at a time, and will be deactivated upon having trapped a large enough prey animal, making them easily distracted for any creature crafty enough to toss bait towards it before they cross. Though if hit with a flashbang or an explosive, every flower will immediately discharge at once, completely deactivating the plant. Next up, the Spine Plant. A strange offshoot of monster kelp, these tall, jagged plants stay relatively motionless, oftentimes basking in the sun. But just like its monster kelp siblings, this changes very quickly once it detects movement. It will quickly react by straightening out the flower that sits on top of the plant into a long and sharp appendage that it then fires into anything that moves, like a harpoon. Anything connected to it is dragged back up to the top of the plant and then down into its roots like any other monster kelp pole plant type thing. If you want to take on one of these plants, you'll have to juke this primary attack and either flee past it or spear it from a distance. However, one should be careful, as upon taking a critical amount of damage, it will eject all of its spines at once, thoroughly perforating its surroundings. This makes them incredibly dangerous if there isn't any free cover nearby, but it also makes them a great ally if you want to grant a third of all creatures in a room some new piercings. As you reach the edge of the Iterator's structure, you can instead head up its slope, but before you reach that area, the Nomad will first come face to face with yet another echo. This one named Southbound Winds, Festering Storm.
We thought ourselves complete. Did you know that? We thought we knew just about everything. Just one more answer. But that answer never came. No matter what we built. Perhaps it was because there were still other answers to seek. What am I saying? Such musings likely put me in this situation to begin with.
If the Nomad continues past this stranger, it may find itself on what used to be this Iterator's exterior. However, something has changed, leaving this environment much more hostile than it would otherwise be. When the Great Iterator died, it was not with a whimper, but with a great wheeze. This wheeze blasted thousands of silicate particles into the sky, and the heat following that ensured they would stay there. Now they rest, suspended in glassy structures that tower higher than the remains they came from. These crystals extend as spikes from the exterior. A treacherous landscape means any steep enough fall could impale you on countless sharp crystalline spikes. The Nomad is lucky it has the skills that it does, as its gliding ability will be required to navigate this place. Between the parkour and the hungry aerial predators that swarm this place, a less experienced player may fall many times when traversing the Glassy Spires. The first creature you may find here are the blowworms. Lying amidst the less sharpened parts of the Glassy Spires are the blowworms, descendants of the grapple-worms that would normally be here, forced to evolve to match their changing environment. No longer able to use their innards to latch onto the hot environment, the blowworms instead opt to traverse the Glassy Spires by expelling great amounts of hot gas and launching themselves upwards or to wherever they want to go. This propelling gas is made up of a mixture of hot air that the blowworm sucks in and the internal gases produced by its digestive processes, both of which mingle inside the animal until the pressure builds up and they release it all at once. When released, the force of the gas propels the worm in the opposite direction of wherever its main orifice is facing. Upon launching itself, it leaves a lot of gas lingering about. This creates a cloud of the choking gas that surrounds its launch point. This gas is not fatal, but if lingered in for too long, it will cause the Nomad to collapse and convulse for a bit. With the blowworm being able to build up immense pressure in its body, other creatures are able to use it to propel themselves along with the blowworm. And when held gently, the blowworm doesn't feel threatened enough and will not release its gas, allowing the Nomad to carry it around with both hands as a useful jump pack, if it can stand the smell. All it takes is one squeeze and the blowworm will release all of its gas at once, causing the Nomad to be launched into the air at great speed, allowing it to gently glide downwards after. A blowworm can only be used once per cycle and can be consumed afterwards upon use, granting a single food pip. Next up, the buzzard. A dangerous variation of the basic vulture, the buzzard strikes fear into any creature unfortunate enough to be caught out in the open. Adapted for soaring over the Deadlands for long periods of time, the vulture's primary food source is dead creatures, and they will not hesitate to snatch up any corpse lying on the ground for a long enough time. This scavenging behavior granted them their name, but do not think that they are exclusively scavengers. The soaring wings of the buzzard makes them much less maneuverable on the ground, but they make up for this by being much more ruthless and persistent. A hungry buzzard will rarely flee or back down, oftentimes sticking around until they are either flying back with prey in their mouth or flying back with several new wounds. Due to this lifestyle, buzzards are coated in scars, and are willing to get some more if it means a fresh meal in the Deadlands. Next up, and finally, the Valkyrie. The droughts of the region have cleared the clouds, and in their absence, a new shadow looms across the sands. The Valkyrie is a creature that has clearly been tampered with. Crude in concept, but clearly functional, using the aquatic leviathans as the base of the creature and grafting dozens of vulture wings across the length of its gas-filled frame. The Valkyrie glides clumsily through the clouds, consuming whatever remains in its sightline for long enough, be that tired buzzards, exhausted land creatures, or you. The Valkyrie is old, however, and is clearly breaking down, causing it to oftentimes fall and be forced to slither weakly across the ground, leaving a clear time to flee from its jaws before it takes flight once more. As of now, its presence is rarely rivaled, and when it shows up, it is a major event. But as it grows older, it may come to pass that its status as the aerial apex will be challenged by the more adaptable species to come. Upon entering the Iterator's remains through the top entrance granted by the Glassy Spires, or through the Sun-baked Citadel or Arid Tunnels, the Nomad finds itself in the remains of the burnt structure. Most of the corridors that make up the burnt structure are free of the beating sun, and the careful construction has clearly fallen into ruins. Sand collects in piles at the floor of each room, blown in by semi-frequent sandstorms, and old biological components lay shriveled, leaking out of the walls and lying on the floor. Few lights dance around, but it's hard to tell if that's just the sun glinting through the breaks in the ceiling, or the last neuron signals of this dead god, whose corpse you're rifling through. Only two creatures can be found here, the first of which being the Surveyors. The Surveyors are hardy, if clunky, automata, similar in nature to the common Overseer, but with a hardened outer casing, making them significantly more resistant to spears. Very few iterators were assigned facilities able to produce these, as they quickly fell out of style soon after being introduced, due to their unneeded bulk and the fact that a simpler model of Overseer could do most of the functions far faster and easier. What functions they can perform over Overseers were, for all intents and purposes, kind of useless in the grand scheme of things. Iterators already had other forms of internal and external defense, and had entire modules dedicated to monitoring structural data. How ironic, then, that these outclassed, near-useless creatures were one of the only parts of this Iterator to survive the sudden shock and collapse. When the Nomad finds them, most of the Surveyors are spending most of their time studying their surroundings. But when alone, they will open up, displaying a wide dearth of information. If snuck up on, they can be struck with a spear, killing them instantly. But if far enough away, or if alerted, the Surveyor might become hostile. If such a situation occurs, you're probably boned, because Surveyors are also equipped with a defensive mechanism, a powerful focused beam of energy that can incinerate most small creatures in seconds. On the bright side, the beam is so hot that it causes a powerful shockwave upon connecting with the floor or walls. This explosion is so strong that it knocks open the Surveyor and grants you the ability to counterattack it. If you survive, that is. Most Surveyors are not immediately hostile, but stray too close or disrupt their work, and they might deem you worthy of being dispatched. As the Nomad moves throughout the burnt structure, past the Surveyor's gaze and into the inner section, it begins to see a sleek shadow dart around the area before it. If you chase the shadow, it leads you deep into the heart of the structure, up the corrupted drives and through the disrepaired coils. As you near the heart of the structure, you begin to see odd objects around the area. Shed skin from a reptilian creature, its scales shiny, sleek, and colored, usable as insulation or trading material. You can see its cast-off fangs, which still hold a potent venom, usable as a powerful late-game weapon. And more disturbingly, tens, perhaps hundreds of scavenger corpses, some hung aloft from spears, others obviously fed on, acting as effigies to ward off any who dare to approach the facility's heart. The Nomad shivers as it wonders just what did this, before, in a large room, the perpetrator reveals itself. The Arbiter, a powerful serpentine slugcat that has been living in the burnt structure for some time. It has killed tens of scavengers, and does not plan on leaving that number where it is. Currently, it sizes up the Nomad to see if it will need to add another to its list of fatalities. The Nomad has 3 choices upon this meeting: attack, do not attack, or flee. Upon attacking, the Arbiter will engage in a duel, striking with swift leaps, strong spear throws, and powerful fangs. It is not an impossible duel, but it is far from the easiest outcome to this encounter. If the Nomad chooses not to attack, and instead shows submission by either dropping its weapons or crouching, the Arbiter will vanish again, continuing to watch Nomad throughout their journey, and continuing to lead them towards the heart of the structure. If they flee, the Arbiter will leave them alone. This is a solidly mid outcome, as the Arbiter will not lead you anywhere, but also won't, try to kill you or anything. As the Nomad climbs up the remains of the General Systems bus, now devoid of any gravity modification that would make the journey trivial by comparison, they find their way to the puppet chamber. The Nomad hesitantly falls into the chamber, expecting to meet with either a corpse or a sentient iterator. It meets with neither. Inside the puppet chamber is a pile of garbage. The heart of the structure, the puppet that led to all of this, their ecosystem warping capabilities that led to the Deadlands' growth in its absence, that dead god's corpse. Their identity now lies crushed beneath 20 tons of rubble. But this is old news. This one has been dead for a while. What is new is what lies atop the pile. A single purple pearl, freshly inscribed, the message the Arbiter brought, and the Nomad's ticket out of this desert. As the Nomad picks up the pearl, they leave through the top of the structure, but are met with the Arbiter one more time. The Arbiter's purpose has been completed. This is now its home. But this is not your home. Its message has already been delivered, but you still have a purpose to fulfill, a life to live. So with one final glance, the Arbiter hops back into the ducts and leaves you be. The Nomad's final moments in the Deadlands are spent retracing its steps, gliding from the top of the spires down to the bottom of the Deadlands. It uses the Arbiter's fangs and hide to survive longer than it otherwise would have, and it hands the pearl that it got to the scavengers and earns its passage out of the Deadlands, to live a life anew in a world that it saw destroyed before its own eyes. Although that same pearl that the Nomad worked so hard for ended up as nothing more than an ornament on a long chain of other colored pearls just like it, what it will never know is the truth of the message contained within. A song, a story, the end of a long and arduous emotional journey, and a final farewell to one that had already left. Attached to this song is a message, a simple couple of sentences, and proof of a promise left unbroken.
I know you've forgotten me, but I could never forget you. I've worked so hard to give this to you. I never could have guessed you wouldn't be here to see it. It doesn't matter. I just needed it all to be said. I love you, sliver of straw. Goodbye. Unbroken promise.
And that ends the Deadlands region concept. This was quite fun to work on, and I'm very excited for y'all to see the associated logs episode with this region. I know it was very hard to see that announcement coming with all the foreshadowing that I definitely didn't do. Anyways, make sure to follow all of the wonderful artists on their social media platforms, linked in the description, or interact with them on my Discord server, where we will be having another one of these, eventually. The next region concept will be the last of the official ones held on this channel, unless some major shit occurs and changes that. Either way, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.